Picture this, a vast, sun-scorched desert stretching out under a sky so blue it feels like a painted ceiling. The heat shimmers off the ground, creating mirages that dance on the horizon. For centuries, this land was a barrier, a place to cross quickly if you had to or to avoid altogether. It was the home of indigenous peoples who knew its secrets, but to the outside world, it was a formidable, empty expanse. Then, a road was built. Not just any road, but a ribbon of asphalt that would weave its way through this unforgiving landscape and completely reimagine what Arizona could be. Before that road, Arizona was a place you passed through on your way to somewhere else, a territory of copper mines and cattle ranches, a last stop before the promised land of California. After that road, Arizona became a destination. This is the story of that transformation, the story of the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state. To understand the power of this road, you have to understand what came before it. In the early 1900s, Arizona was still a raw, rough-edged territory, not yet a state. Its economy was built on hard work and heavy industry. Copper mining was king, with towns like Bisbee, Jerome, and Globe bustling with miners and smelter workers. Cattle ranching spread across the high plateaus and grasslands. The railroads had carved their paths through the territory, but they were for freight and long-distance travel, not for the casual explorer or family adventurer. The idea of traveling for pleasure, of vacationing in the desert, seemed almost laughable. The desert was considered dangerous, inhospitable, a place of rattlesnakes, scorpions, and unbearable heat. People didn't go to Arizona to have fun. They went to work or they went through it on the train, peering out the window at the rugged beauty but never stepping off. Then came the automobile. It started as a rich man's toy but quickly became a symbol of freedom and possibility. By the 19-teens and 20s, cars were becoming more reliable, more affordable, and more common. People began to dream of road trips, of exploring the country at their own pace. But there were no good roads. Most of the country was still connected by dirt tracks that turned to mud in the rain, and the vast distances of the West were daunting. The federal government recognized the need for a national highway system, and in 1926, the United States Numbered Highway System was born. Among the most famous of these new highways was U.S. Route 66, a highway that would run from Chicago, Illinois, to Santa Monica, California. It passed through 8 states, including Arizona, and it is that stretch of road through Arizona that changed everything. Route 66 entered Arizona from the east near the town of Lupton, on the border with New Mexico. From there, it cut a diagonal path across the northeastern corner of the state, passing through the Painted Desert and the Petrified Forest. Then it turned west, heading toward the small city of Flagstaff, nestled at the base of the San Francisco Peaks. From Flagstaff, the road curved southwest, dropping down through the rugged Oak Creek Canyon into the red rock wonderland of Sedona. It continued south through the Verde Valley, past the mining town of Jerome, and then climbed up to the high desert of Prescott. From there, it went south again, passing through the ghost towns and ranches, before winding its way through the mountains to the sprawling city of Phoenix. Finally, it crossed the Colorado River at Topak, heading into California. Every mile of that route was a visual feast, but before Route 66, almost none of it was accessible to the average traveler. There were no gas stations, no motels, no diners, no souvenir shops. There was just the land. The road changed that, and it changed it fast. Entrepreneurs, small business owners, and dreamers saw the potential. They built gas stations at strategic intervals, knowing that cars needed fuel and water. They built tiny cabins, called motor courts or tourist courts, where travelers could sleep for a few dollars a night. They opened cafes serving homemade pies, hamburgers, and coffee. They put up hand-painted signs advertising Indian jewelry, petrified wood, snake pits, and live rattlesnake shows. They understood that the road itself was the attraction, and they were determined to make sure that people stopped, spent their money, and told their friends. One of the first places to feel the impact of this new road was the Petrified Forest. This area, a portion of the Painted Desert, was already known for its ancient fossilized logs, but visiting it was difficult. With the coming of Route 66, it became a roadside attraction. Travelers would pull over, walk among the colorful petrified wood, and buy a piece to take home as a souvenir. The National Park Service eventually made it a national monument, and later a national park, but the road was the reason most people ever saw it. The same was true for the Painted Desert. The layers of red, orange, purple, and gray rock that looked like a giant artist's palette were now visible from the highway, and visitors stopped in awe. Further west, Flagstaff became a major hub. It was a railroad town already, but the highway gave it a second life as a tourist stop. Travelers heading to the Grand Canyon would break their journey in Flagstaff, stocking up on supplies and resting. Motels sprang up along the main drag, and the town's lumber and ranching economy was slowly supplemented by a new cash crop: tourism. The Grand Canyon itself, one of the natural wonders of the world, had been a destination for wealthy railroad tourists, but the road made it accessible to the middle class. A family from Iowa could now pile into their Ford and drive all the way to the rim. They could stand on the edge and look into that immense chasm, and then go back to their car and drive away. The road democratized the Grand Canyon, and that changed everything. But perhaps the most dramatic transformation happened in a place called Sedona. In the 1920s, Sedona was a tiny farming community with a few dozen residents. It was beautiful, surrounded by the red rock formations that would later become world famous, but there was no reason for anyone to go there. The road didn't go there. Then, in the early 1920s, a man named T. Carl Schneble and his wife Sedona, for whom the town is named, built a road from the nearby railroad station. But it was the extension of Route 66 that really opened the door. A spur road, State Route 89A, was built through Oak Creek Canyon, connecting Sedona to Flagstaff. Suddenly, travelers on Route 66 could take a detour into this hidden paradise. The drive was breathtaking, winding through the canyon with its steep walls and clear creek. People were mesmerized. They started buying property, building cabins, and opening lodges. Sedona went from a sleepy hamlet to a tourist town in just a few decades. The same story played out in dozens of towns along the route. In the small community of Kingman, which billed itself as the heart of Route 66, the highway brought a steady stream of travelers. Motels like the El Travetter and the Hilltop offered rooms with neon signs glowing in the night. In Oatman, a former gold mining town, the road kept the town alive even after the mines closed. Today, Oatman is famous for its wild burros that roam the streets, descendants of the pack animals that the miners brought. But back then, it was a place to stop, buy a cold drink, and hear a story from a grizzled old miner. The road also changed the way people thought about Arizona. Before Route 66, the state was often portrayed in popular culture as a desolate, dangerous place. Cowboys and Indians, yes, but also outlaws and gunfights. After the road came, magazines, newspapers, and travel books began to describe Arizona as a land of enchantment, a place of breathtaking scenery, dry air, and endless sunshine. The phrase, the Grand Canyon State, became a marketing tool. Tourist bureaus, chambers of commerce, and the state government itself started actively promoting Arizona as a vacation destination. They understood that the road was the pipeline, and they wanted to fill it with people. One of the key figures in this promotion was the state's first tourism director, a man named Barry Goldwater. Yes, the same Barry Goldwater who later became a senator and presidential candidate. He was an avid photographer and a businessman who owned a department store in Phoenix. He saw the potential of tourism and used his connections to spread the word. He took photographs of the state's natural wonders and sent them to national publications. He lobbied for better roads and more facilities. He understood that Arizona had something that other states didn't, a unique, dramatic landscape that could be experienced from the road. But the road was not just a pathway for tourists, it was also a lifeline for local communities. During the Great Depression, many small towns in Arizona were struggling. Mining had slowed, farming was tough, and there were few jobs. Then the road projects came. The construction of Route 66 itself provided employment for hundreds of men. Then, once the road was open, the businesses that grew along it provided more jobs. A family could run a motel, a gas station, a cafe. They could sell Indian crafts, pottery, blankets, and silver jewelry. The native Navajo and Hopi people also benefited, setting up roadside stands and trading posts. The road was an economic engine that brought money into places that had never seen it before. And it wasn't just about money, it was about identity. Arizona began to see itself not just as a place of hard labor and extraction, but as a place of beauty and leisure. The road gave Arizonans a new pride in their home. They started to appreciate the red rocks, the canyons, the forests, and the desert. They realized that what had once been considered a wasteland was actually a wonderland. The road was a mirror that reflected back the state's own grandeur. As the years passed, the road evolved. In the 1950s, the interstate highway system was born, and many sections of Route 66 were bypassed or replaced by faster, wider highways. Towns that once thrived on the traffic of Route 66 began to wither, but the road's legacy was already set. It had turned Arizona into a tourist state, and the tourism industry had become a cornerstone of the economy. Even after the official decommissioning of Route 66 in 1985, the state continued to draw visitors, many of them coming to drive the old road itself, to experience a bit of Americana. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. For now, imagine yourself in the mid-1920s, standing at the side of a dusty track near the Arizona-New Mexico border. A faint hum rises on the air. It grows louder. A car appears, a black Model T Ford covered in grime. It rattles to a stop. The driver steps out, stretching his legs. He looks around at the painted desert stretching to the horizon. He is the first wave of a flood. Behind him, thousands more will come. And the road will carry them all, turning a territory into a destination, a pass-through into a paradise. This is the opening of a story that is still being written, but its first chapter is written in asphalt and dreams, and its name is Route 66. And so in the mid-1920s, that first wave of travelers began to arrive. But the road they traveled was not yet the smooth, paved ribbon it would become. It was still a patchwork of graded dirt, gravel, and in some places, just a pair of ruts across the open range. Rain could turn it into a quagmire of red mud that would swallow a car up to its axles. Dust storms could reduce visibility to zero. Breakdowns were common, and a flat tire was not an inconvenience but a major event that could take hours to fix. The men and women who drove this road in its early years were pioneers in their own right, and they carried with them a spirit of adventure that later tourists would never know. They carried water, food, extra gasoline, and a shovel. They understood that the road was not yet tamed, and that Arizona was still a wild place. But even in its rough state, the road worked its magic. Word spread. The people who made it through told stories of the painted hills, the petrified forests, and the vast sky that seemed to go on forever. They described the cool pine forests around Flagstaff, the sudden plunging canyon of Oak Creek, and the red rock cathedrals near Sedona. They told of the hospitality of the small towns where you could get a hot meal and a bed for $1. And those stories, told around dinner tables in Chicago or St. Louis or Los Angeles, planted a seed. People began to dream of Arizona. The road itself began to improve. By the early 1930s, the federal government recognized Route 66 as a major artery and began to fund its paving. The Civilian Conservation Corps, a New Deal program, put thousands of young men to work grading, laying gravel, and eventually pouring concrete. They built bridges, culverts, and retaining walls. They straightened curves and cut through hills. Each mile of pavement made the journey easier, faster, and more reliable. And each mile brought Arizona closer to the rest of the country. The Great Migration of the Dust Bowl in the 1930s also played a role. Thousands of families from Oklahoma, Texas, and the plains loaded their belongings onto trucks and cars and headed west on Route 66. They were fleeing drought and poverty, seeking a new life in California, but many of them stopped in Arizona. They saw the orchards of the Salt River Valley near Phoenix, the cotton fields around Casa Grande, and the ranches of the high country. Some decided that they had traveled far enough. They stayed and they became Arizonans. Their arrival brought new labor, new ideas, and new customers for the tourist businesses that were springing up. One such business was the Wigwam Motel, which opened in Hallbrook in 1937. It was a string of concrete teepees, each one a tiny room where travelers could sleep under a pretend tipi. It was kitschy, unforgettable, and perfectly suited to the highway. People took photographs of themselves standing in front of the teepees and mailed them to relatives back home. The Wigwam Motel became an icon, a symbol of the roadside whimsy that Route 66 inspired. And it was not alone. Every town had its own version of a gimmick to lure travelers off the road. In Winslow, there was the La Posada Hotel, a grand Spanish-style inn designed by the architect Mary Coulter for the Fred Harvey Company. It was a place of luxury in the middle of the desert, with gardens, a fine restaurant, and rooms that cost a little more but offered a taste of elegance. Travelers who could afford it stopped there, and they remembered it for the rest of their lives. But the road was also a place of more modest pleasures. The diners and cafes that lined the highway served up hearty food at reasonable prices. A plate of eggs and hash browns for breakfast, a hamburger and a milkshake for lunch, a steak dinner for under $1 at night. The cooks were often local women who knew how to make a pie crust flaky and a cup of coffee strong. The waitresses called you honey and remembered your order. The gas stations were full service too, with attendants who checked your oil, cleaned your windshield, and gave you directions in a drawl. It was a human experience, and it made the road feel like a friend. As the 1940s arrived, the road was now fully paved, and traffic increased dramatically. The war years brought a different kind of traveler, soldiers and defense workers moving between bases and factories. Route 66 carried troops from the training camps of the Midwest to the ports of California. It carried military supplies and equipment. Arizona itself became a training ground, with bases in Phoenix, Tucson, and Yuma. The infrastructure of the road was put to the test, and it held. After the war, the pent-up demand for travel exploded. Men returning from the war had seen the world and they wanted to see their own country. They bought cars, they bought houses in new suburbs, and they took vacations. Route 66 became the road of choice for a generation of Americans discovering the West. The 1950s were the golden age of Route 66 in Arizona. The highway was crowded with cars, station wagons, and travel trailers. Motels proliferated, many of them family-run. You could find a clean room with a private bathroom and a television for $5 a night. Swimming pools became standard, a welcome relief in the desert heat. The neon signs blazed at night, each one a beacon. Vacancy, air conditioning, color TV. The signs themselves became art, with arrows pointing down, stars twinkling, and cowboys waving. The road was a carnival of light and color, but the 50s also brought the first hints of change. The federal government began planning the interstate highway system, a network of divided, limited-access highways that would bypass the old two-lane roads. The first sections of Interstate 40, which would eventually replace Route 66 across northern Arizona, were built in the late 1950s. Towns like Holbrook, Winslow, and Kingman watched with anxiety as the new highway skirted their downtowns. They knew what was coming, but for a while Route 66 still held its own. The old road was still the more scenic, the more interesting, and the more authentic way to travel. Tourists still chose it, even if it took a little longer. Meanwhile, another transformation was underway. The rise of air conditioning made Arizona a year-round destination. In the early days, summer travel was brutal. The heat in the desert could reach 120 degrees, and cars without air conditioning were like ovens. Travelers would stop frequently to pour water over themselves, or they would drive only at night. But once air conditioning became common in cars, motels, and restaurants, the summer months became tolerable. People began to visit Arizona not just in the spring and fall, but in July and August. They discovered that the desert had a different kind of beauty in the heat, with dramatic thunderstorms and a sky that turned purple at sunset. The state also began to diversify its attractions. The Grand Canyon remained the crown jewel, but other sites gained prominence. Meteor Crater, a massive hole in the earth near Winslow, became a popular stop. The London Bridge was moved from England to Lake Havasu City in the 1960s, a bizarre and brilliant marketing stunt that drew crowds. The town of Tombstone, with its OK Corral, became a living history museum, and the national monuments and parks multiplied. Saguaro National Monument, Organ Pipe Cactus, and later, the Grand Canyon Parashant. Each one was connected by a road, and each one brought more visitors. The story of Route 66 in Arizona is also a story of people. There was the owner of the Snow-Capped Drive-In in Seligman, a man named Juan Delgadillo, who entertained customers by squirting them with mustard from a fake bottle and telling bad jokes. His place became famous for its zaniness, a must-stop for anyone driving the old road. There was the woman who ran the Twin Arrows trading post, selling Navajo rugs and silver jewelry from a building shaped like two giant arrows. There was the gas station attendant in Ash Fork who memorized the license plates of every state and could tell you where you were from before you even got out of your car. These were the characters who gave the road its soul. And then there were the travelers themselves. A young couple from Ohio on their honeymoon, driving a Chevrolet convertible with the top down, stopping to take a picture of each other in front of a cactus. A family of 6 from Pennsylvania, the kids fighting in the back seat, the father muttering about the heat, the mother consulting a tattered road map. A retired schoolteacher from Minnesota, driving alone, looking for the things she had read about in National Geographic. They all came, and they all left a little piece of themselves behind on that road. As the 1960s progressed, the interstate highway system expanded. By the early 1970s, most of Route 66 in Arizona had been bypassed by Interstate 40. The old road was no longer the main artery. Traffic dwindled, motels closed. Gas stations became weed-choked ruins. The neon signs dimmed, but not everyone gave up. Some towns, like Seligman and Kingman, fought to preserve their stretch of the highway. They formed associations and lobbied for historic designation. They painted murals and erected signs. They realized that the road itself, the old road, could become a tourist attraction in its own right, and it worked. In the 1980s, after Route 66 was officially decommissioned, a new wave of tourists began to seek it out. These were nostalgia seekers, history buffs, and international visitors who had heard the song and seen the television show. They wanted to drive the original road, even if it was cracked and winding. They wanted to see the Wigwam Motel, the painted desert, and the red rocks of Sedona. They wanted to eat at the Snow Cap and buy a piece of petrified wood. The road that had turned Arizona into a tourist state now became a tourist attraction itself. It had come full circle. and so the legacy endures. Today, you can still drive segments of the old Route 66 through Arizona. The Petrified Forest National Park incorporates a stretch of the original highway. The town of Williams has preserved its downtown as a historic district. In Oatman, the burros still roam and the gunfights still happen on the street. The road is a living museum of mid-century America, but more than that, it is a reminder of how a single ribbon of asphalt can transform a place. Arizona was never the same after Route 66 came through. The road gave the state an identity, an economy, and a place in the American imagination. It turned a territory into a destination, a pass-through into a paradise, and every traveler who drives it becomes part of that story, a footnote in the long, dusty, glorious history of the road that built a tourist state. The road that turned Arizona into a tourist state did not simply fade into the desert dust. It transformed, adapted, and stubbornly refused to die. In the decades that followed the decommissioning of Route 66, a curious thing happened. The very people who had once abandoned the old road for the speed of the interstates began to rediscover it. They came not as travelers in a hurry, but as pilgrims on a pilgrimage. They came with cameras and notebooks, with old maps and a hunger for a time that had passed. They came from Japan, from Germany, from Australia. They had seen the old black and white photographs, the postcards with the neon signs, the episodes of the television show. They wanted to drive the road themselves, to feel the heat shimmer off the asphalt, to stand at the edge of the painted desert and imagine what it must have been like when the Studebakers and Packards rolled through. And so the road became a museum without walls. In Seligman, the snow-capped drive-in still stands, a chaotic marvel of kitsch and charm. The mustard bottle still squirts, the jokes are still terrible, and the laughter still echoes off the walls. Juan Delgadillo passed away in 2004, but his brother and his family kept the place alive. Today, a new generation of travelers lines up for a burger and a shake, and they leave with a story to tell. In Kingman, the Route 66 Museum tells the story of the road from its birth to its twilight. Every artifact, every photograph, every scrap of memorabilia is a thread in a tapestry that stretches from Chicago to Santa Monica. The volunteers who run the museum are often the same people who lived through those golden years. They remember when the road was crowded with cars and the motels were full every night. They tell stories of the Dust Bowl migrants, the soldiers, the honeymooners, the families. They speak with a reverence that is almost religious. But the transformation of Arizona into a tourist state was never just about Route 66. The road was the spine, but the bones were built by other forces. One of the most powerful was the rise of the winter visitor, or as they came to be known, the snowbird. Beginning in the 1950s and accelerating through the 60s and 70s, retirees from the Midwest, the Northeast, and Canada began to flock to Arizona for the winter months. They came in mobile homes and motorhomes, setting up camp in parks that sprouted like wildflowers across the desert. Places like Mesa, Apache Junction, and Yuma became winter capitals for the elderly. They brought their pension checks, their social security, and their demand for warm weather and gentle living. They played golf, they played bingo, they played shuffleboard. They formed communities that were rich with social life, and they spent money. The winter visitor economy became a pillar of Arizona's tourism industry, and it remains so today. The rise of the winter visitor was closely tied to another innovation, the air-conditioned resort. In the early 20th century, luxury resorts had existed in Arizona, but they were seasonal, open only from October to May. The summer heat was considered unbearable. But by the 1960s, advances in cooling technology made it possible to keep a hotel room at 72 degrees even when the thermometer outside hit 110. Resorts began to stay open year-round. They added swimming pools, tennis courts, and later, spa facilities. They marketed themselves as desert oases, places to escape the humidity of the east and the cold of the north. The Arizona Biltmore in Phoenix, the Wigwam in Litchfield Park, the Arizona Inn in Tucson became icons of luxury. They attracted presidents, movie stars, and business tycoons, and they set the standard for what a desert vacation could be. Then there was the Grand Canyon. It had always been the crown jewel, but the way people experienced it changed dramatically over the decades. In the early days, visitors arrived by train or by car on unpaved roads. They stayed in rustic lodges and looked out over the rim with a sense of awe that was almost spiritual. But as air travel became more accessible, the Grand Canyon became a destination for a global audience. The 1960s saw the construction of the Grand Canyon Airport, which brought tourists from Las Vegas and Los Angeles. Helicopter tour became popular, offering a view that had been impossible just a generation before. The National Park Service worked to preserve the natural wonder while accommodating the millions who came each year. They built overlooks, trails, and visitor centers. They struggled with the balance between accessibility and preservation, a struggle that continues today. At the same time, the state began to promote itself aggressively. The Arizona Office of Tourism, established in the 1970s, launched campaigns that emphasized the state's diversity. The red rocks of Sedona, the pine forests of Flagstaff, the saguaro-studded deserts of the South, the ski slopes of the San Francisco Peaks. They marketed Arizona as a place where you could experience 4 seasons in a single day, where you could ski in the morning and hike in the afternoon. They played up the cowboy mystique, the Wild West heritage, the legend of Billy the Kid and Wyatt Earp. They invited filmmakers to shoot movies in the state, and the movies became advertisements in themselves. John Wayne rode through Monument Valley. Paul Newman and Robert Redford raced through the canyons in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The landscape became a character in its own right, but not all of Arizona's tourism growth was smooth. The same road that brought tourists also brought challenges. The boom in automobile travel led to congestion on the interstates, especially around Phoenix and Tucson. The popularity of the Grand Canyon led to overcrowding and environmental strain. The rise of the winter visitor transformed small towns into sprawling retirement communities, straining infrastructure and altering the character of the places that had once been quiet and rural. There were conflicts between developers and conservationists, between those who wanted to preserve the natural beauty and those who wanted to capitalize on it. The story of Arizona as a tourist state is also a story of tension, and still, the road kept attracting. Even after the interstates had stolen most of the traffic, the old Route 66 remained a draw for a certain kind of traveler. In the 1990s, a new generation of enthusiasts began to restore the old motels and gas stations. The Wigwam Motel in Hallbrook, with its concrete teepees, had been a novelty since the 1950s, but in the 1990s, it was renovated and reborn as a retro destination. People came to sleep in a teepee, to swim in the kidney-shaped pool, to feel like they had stepped into a time capsule. The same thing happened in Kingman, where the El Rey Motel was restored to its 1950s glory. In Williams, the Grand Canyon Railway was revived, bringing tourists from the town to the South Rim on a vintage train. The railway had been abandoned in the 1960s, but it was brought back to life in 1989, and it quickly became one of the most popular attractions in the state. The railroad itself is a testament to the other great artery that helped build Arizona's tourism industry. Before the road, there was the rail. The Santa Fe Railway had been bringing visitors to the Grand Canyon since the early 1900s. The railway built the El Tavar Hotel, a masterpiece of rustic elegance that still stands today. The railroad was the first to bring tourists to the Grand Canyon in large numbers, and it continued to carry passengers until the automobile made it obsolete. But the revival of the Grand Canyon Railway showed that there was still a hunger for the romance of the rails. People wanted to sit in a restored Pullman car and watch the desert roll by, to hear the whistle blow and feel the clickety-clack of the tracks. It was a slower, more deliberate way of traveling, and it appealed to a generation that had grown tired of speed. Meanwhile, the state's Native American communities became a major part of the tourism story. Navajo Nation, the Hopi tribe, the Tohono O'odham, the Apache, and others opened their lands to visitors. They built museums, cultural centers, and trading posts. They sold jewelry, rugs, pottery, and kachina dolls. They offered guided tour of their sacred sites like Canyon de Chelly and Monument Valley. They performed dances and ceremonies for the public. This was not without its complications. There were debates about authenticity, about exploitation, about who had the right to tell the stories. But for many travelers, the opportunity to learn about Native American culture was a powerful draw. It gave Arizona a depth that other tourist states lacked. It was not just a place of natural beauty, it was a place of living history. As the 21st century dawned, Arizona found itself at a crossroads. The old road was still there, but it was fading. Some sections had been paved over or abandoned. The neon signs were slowly disappearing, either taken down by weather or sold to collectors. The towns along the old road were struggling. Seligman, Hallbrook, and Winslow had all seen their populations decline. The tourist dollars that once flowed through the main streets had been diverted to the interstate exits, where chain motels and fast food restaurants had taken root. The mom-and-pop businesses could not compete, but then a new wave of preservationists stepped in. They formed the historic Route 66 Association of Arizona, which worked to get the road designated as a national scenic byway. They put up signs that read Historic Route 66 and Old Route 66. They organized festivals and car shows and parades. They made sure the road was not forgotten. One of the most remarkable efforts came in the town of Winslow. Winslow had been immortalized in the Eagles' song Take It Easy, with its famous line, "Standin' on a corner in Winslow, Arizona." For years, the town had been a fading relic, its downtown shuttered and empty. But in the 1990s, a group of citizens decided to capitalize on that song. They built a small park on the corner of 2nd Street and Kinsley Avenue, complete with a bronze statue of a man holding a guitar. They called it the Stand-In on the Corner Park. They put up a mural and a neon sign, and then they waited. The tourists came. They came from all over the world just to stand on that corner and take a photo. They came because of a song, because of a lyric that had lodged in their memories. It was a brilliant piece of placemaking, a way to turn a forgotten town into a destination. Winslow is still small, but it is no longer invisible. The corner is always busy, and the gift shop is always open. The success of Winslow inspired other towns. Seligman painted its buildings in bright colors and put up a giant statue of a jackrabbit. Kingman built a visitor center shaped like a giant Route 66 sign. Holbrook fixed up its petrified wood shops and its dinosaur museum. The road itself became a brand, a logo, a promise. You could buy a t-shirt, a coffee mug, a keychain, or a license plate frame that said Route 66. The road was no longer just a highway. It was a symbol of freedom, of adventure, of a lost America. And that symbol continues to draw people from across the globe. In the summer of 2024, a young couple from South Korea rented a convertible and drove from Chicago to Los Angeles, following the old road as best they could. They stopped at every quirky roadside attraction they could find. They ate at diners that had been serving travelers since the 1940s. They slept in motels where the doors still had metal keys and the beds still had coin-operated vibrators. They took pictures of every neon sign, every rusted gas pump, every crumbling adobe building. They were not just tourists, they were time travelers. They were chasing a dream that had been sold to them by movies and music and old postcards. And when they reached the end of the road at the Santa Monica Pier, they stood on the beach and looked back at the ocean. They had driven through the heart of Arizona, through the painted deserts and the red rocks, through the towns that had been born from the road. They had seen it all, and they understood in a way that few people do that a road is not just a way to get from one place to another. It is a story, and that story is still being written. So the legacy endures, but it is not static. It is alive. Every year, thousands of people gather for the Route 66 Fun Run, a weekend-long celebration that draws classic cars and vintage costumes. The road fills with the sounds of engines and laughter. The old motels open their doors, the gas stations sell sodas and souvenirs, and the neon lights flicker back to life. For a few days in the spring, the road is exactly as it was in the 50s, crowded and loud and full of promise. And then the caravan passes and the road goes quiet again. But the signs remain. The burros in Oatman still beg for carrots. The petrified wood still glitters in the sun. The Grand Canyon still stretches to the horizon. And the road still calls to anyone who hears its name. Arizona is no longer a pass-through. It is a place where people come to stay, to play, to retire, to explore. It is a state built on sunshine and grit, on highways and byways, on the dreams of those who saw a desert and imagined a paradise. The road that turned it into a tourist state is not a single ribbon of asphalt. It is 1,000 roads, 1,000 stories, 1,000 moments of discovery. And every traveler who follows them becomes part of that ongoing narrative. They add their own footnotes, their own photographs, their own memories. The road is never finished. It is always waiting for the next traveler to come along, to stand on the corner in Winslow, to eat a burger in Seligman, to watch the sun set over the Vermilion Cliffs. The road is a promise, and it is kept, and it is kept, but keeping a promise is not always easy. The road that turned Arizona into a tourist state has faced new challenges in the 21st century, challenges that no one could have predicted when the first motorists chugged across the desert in their Model Ts. The climate is changing. The summers are hotter, the droughts longer, the wildfires more frequent. The very beauty that draws millions of visitors each year is under threat. The saguaro cacti that stand like ancient sentinels along the highways are dying, their arms drooping in the heat. The forests of the Mogollon Rim are burning with such intensity that the smoke turns the sky orange for weeks. The Colorado River, the lifeblood of the state, is shrinking. Lake Mead, once a shimmering playground for boaters and swimmers, is now ringed with a bathtub ring of pale rock, a monument to a century of water mismanagement. And yet the tourists keep coming. In 2023, Arizona welcomed more than 45 million visitors, a record. They came for the Grand Canyon, yes, but also for Sedona, for the Red Rocks, for the golf courses in Scottsdale, for the luxury spas in Tucson, for the spring training baseball games in the Valley of the Sun. They came for the Native American festivals and the cowboy poetry gatherings and the hot air balloon festivals. They came for the food, the craft beer, the wine from the Verde Valley. They came because Arizona had become a brand, a promise of warmth and wonder, a place where you could escape the gray skies of winter and find yourself in a landscape that looked like another planet. But the pandemic changed something. In 2020, when the world shut down, the tourists disappeared overnight. The hotels emptied, the restaurants closed, the roads fell silent. It was eerie, like a ghost town come to life. The Grand Canyon, which usually sees 6 million visitors a year, saw only a trickle. The Navajo Nation closed its borders entirely, a move that protected its elders but devastated its tourism economy. For a few months, the desert was quiet. The animals came back. The coyotes howled at night in the empty streets of Sedona. The javelinas wandered through the parking lots of closed souvenir shops. And the people who lived in Arizona, the ones who had always chafed at the crowds, felt a strange mix of relief and sorrow. They had wanted the state back for themselves, but they had not imagined it would feel so lonely. When the tourists returned, they came in different ways. They came in RVs and camper vans, seeking wide-open spaces and social distance. They came to hike the trails that had been too crowded before, to camp in the backcountry, to float down the Salt River in inner tubes. They came with a new appreciation for the outdoors, for the solitude that the desert could offer. The old road, Route 66, saw a resurgence as families looked for road trips that did not involve airports or cruise ships. They wanted to drive, to stop at a diner where the waitress knew your name, to sleep in a motel where the walls were thin but the stars were bright. They wanted a nostalgia that felt safe, a past that had not been ruined by the present, and so the road adapted. In Kingman, a couple opened a retro gas station turned cafe, serving milkshakes and chili dogs from a 1950s menu. In Seligman, a new generation of entrepreneurs took over the old snow-capped drive-in, keeping the menu exactly as it had been when the original owner, Juan Delgadillo, started serving burgers in the 1950s. They even kept his famous sign, the one that read "Free coffee tomorrow." When tourists asked about it, they smiled and said, "Well, come back tomorrow." And the tourists laughed and took photos and posted them on Instagram, and the road became a meme, a hashtag, a story that spread across the world. But not everyone was happy. The surge in tourism brought problems. The small towns that had fought for so long to survive suddenly found themselves overwhelmed. The infrastructure was not designed for the crowds. The parking lots overflowed. The septic systems failed. The trails were eroded by thousands of boots. The quiet places became loud. In Sedona, the city council debated limiting the number of visitors, imposing fees, requiring permits to hike the most popular trails. In Jerome, a former mining town perched on a hillside, the narrow streets became so clogged with cars that the police started issuing warnings. In Monument Valley, the Navajo Nation had to close some of the most iconic viewpoints because the land could not handle the traffic, and there was a deeper tension. The tourists came for the Native American culture, but they often did not understand it. They photographed ceremonies without permission. They bargained aggressively at the trading posts. They climbed on sacred rocks. They left trash at the base of Spider Rock. The Navajo Nation, the Hopi, the Tohono O'odham, they had welcomed visitors for generations, but they were beginning to question the cost. A young Hopi potter told me once, "They come to see us like we are a museum. They take pictures of my grandmother weaving a basket, and they never ask her name. They buy a piece of pottery, and then they go home and put it on a shelf. They don't know the prayer that went into it, the clay that came from the earth, the hands that shaped it. They just want a souvenir." And she was right. The road that brought prosperity also brought exploitation. The delicate balance between sharing and selling, between hospitality and hospitality's shadow, had to be negotiated every day. The state's leaders did not ignore these problems. In 2022, the Arizona Office of Tourism launched a new campaign called Arizona Unforgettable. It featured videos of people hiking, biking, kayaking, and stargazing, all with a gentle reminder: tread lightly, take only pictures, leave only footprints. It was a step, but the road itself does not care about campaigns. The road is a relentless storyteller, and it will keep telling its tale whether we are ready or not. Consider the story of the El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, the ancient trade route that connected Mexico City to Santa Fe. It passed through the southern part of Arizona, a dusty path that carried silver, slaves, and saints for centuries. That road is now a National Historic Trail, but you would not know it unless you looked closely. Most of it is gone, swallowed by the desert, paved over by Interstate 19. but there are places where you can still see the ruts, the grooves worn into the earth by the feet of 1,000 years. And if you stand there in the silence, you can almost hear the bells of the mule trains, the whispered prayers of the missionaries, the laughter of children who played in the dust. That road, too, turns Arizona into a tourist state, though its tourists are mostly ghosts. And then there is the road that was never built. In the 1960s, the federal government proposed a highway that would cut across the Grand Canyon, a bridge and a tunnel that would make it easier to reach the North Rim. The plan was called the Grand Canyon National Monument Highway, and it would have destroyed one of the most sacred and beautiful places on Earth. But a group of conservationists, led by a woman named Rachel Carson, fought it. They wrote letters, gave speeches, held protests. They argued that some places are not meant to be visited, that some roads should never be built. And they won. The highway was canceled. The Grand Canyon remained wild. It was a rare victory, a moment when the road did not get its way. That story is remembered now as a cautionary tale. It reminds us that the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state could have been a very different road. It could have been a path of destruction, a scar across the land. Instead, it became a delicate dance, a negotiation between progress and preservation. Every new trail, every new hotel, every new parking lot is a decision. Do we build another lodge at the South Rim? Do we widen the road through Oak Creek Canyon? Do we allow drones to fly over the petroglyphs? The answers are never easy and they are never final. The road is always asking, and the people of Arizona are always answering. In 2025, a new generation of travelers is emerging. They are digital nomads, remote workers who can live anywhere. They come to Arizona not for a week, but for a season. They rent apartments in Flagstaff or cottages in Bisbee or cabins in the White Mountains. They work from their laptops in coffee shops and co-working spaces, and then they spend their weekends hiking the San Francisco peaks or kayaking the Verde River. They want community, not just scenery. They want to be part of the story, not just observers. And so they start businesses, a vegan cafe in Cottonwood, an art gallery in Douglas, a tiny house rental on the outskirts of Patagonia. They inject new life into old towns and they bring new ideas. They are not tourists. They are settlers in a way, though they would never use that word. And the old road, Route 66, has become a global phenomenon. In 2026, the centennial of the highway's creation, the state plans a year-long celebration. There will be parades, concerts, art exhibits, and a concerted effort to preserve every remaining mile of the original pavement. The historic Route 66 Association of Arizona is raising money to restore the neon signs in Hallbrook and to rebuild the Wigwam Motel's iconic teepees. The town of Meteor City, which is not really a town but a single gas station and a few souvenir shops, is planning to build a museum dedicated to the meteor that created the nearby crater. They are going to call it the Meteorite Museum, and they are going to sell chunks of meteorite at the gift shop. It is the American way: turn a rock from space into a souvenir, turn a hole in the ground into a destination. But the most important thing about the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state is not the road itself. It is the people who travel it and the people who live along it. It is the waitress at the Twin Arrows trading post who has been serving coffee to travelers for 40 years. It is the Navajo silversmith who learned his craft from his grandfather and now sells his jewelry at a roadside stand. It is the teenager in Flagstaff who works as a guide on the Grand Canyon Railway, pointing out the elk and the eagles as the train rumbles through the ponderosa pines. It is the retiree in Sedona who volunteers at the visitor center, handing out maps and telling stories about the Red Rocks. They are the ones who keep the promise of the road alive. They are the ones who turn a highway into a home. And so the road continues. It winds through the desert, past the ghost towns and the souvenir stands, past the sacred sites and the strip malls. It climbs into the mountains and descends into the valleys. It crosses the Colorado River at the Hoover Dam, a monument to human ambition, and it ends at the edge of the Grand Canyon, a monument to time. And every traveler who follows it adds a new layer to the story. They might take a selfie at the painted desert, or buy a turquoise bracelet at a trading post, or sleep in a wigwam motel. They might stop at a diner and order a slice of prickly pear pie. They might get out of their car and stand in the middle of the road, just to feel the heat rising from the asphalt, to hear the silence that is louder than any city. And then they will drive on and the road will be different for them. It will be a memory, a photograph, a postcard sent home. And when they tell their friends about their trip, they will say, "You have to drive Route 66. They will say, "You have to see the Grand Canyon." They will say, "You have to go to Arizona." And the road will be waiting. It has been waiting for 100 years. It will wait for 100 more. It will wait for the next traveler to come along, to stand on the corner in Winslow, to eat a burger in Seligman, to watch the sun set over the Vermilion Cliffs. It will wait for the dreamers and the wanderers, the seekers and the lost. It will wait for the families and the couples, the solo drivers and the bikers. It will wait for the ones who are running away and the ones who are running toward. It will wait because the road is a promise. And it is kept every day, by every mile, by every traveler who breathes life into the old asphalt. The road that turned Arizona into a tourist state is not just a road. It is a living thing, a pulse, a heartbeat. And as long as there are people who want to see the desert, who want to feel the wind, who want to stand on the edge of something vast and ancient and unknowable, the road will be there. It will be there, waiting, ready to take them home. And so the road waits, but it also changes. In the 21st century, the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state faces its greatest test yet: climate change. The Colorado River, which brought the water that made the desert bloom, is shrinking. The snowpack in the San Francisco peaks is thinning. The summer temperatures in Phoenix and Tucson are climbing past 110 degrees, and the heat waves are longer and more deadly. The road, for all its romance, is a lifeline in a land that is growing more hostile by the decade. The tourists still come, but they come with air conditioners and water bottles and sun hats, and they leave with a growing unease. They see the dry riverbeds and the dying forests and the wildfire scars that stretch for miles. They see the signs that say fire danger, extreme, and the news reports about the Colorado River being at a historic low. They come to the Grand Canyon and find the waterfalls at Havasu Creek reduced to a trickle. They come to Sedona and find the creeks that once ran year-round now bone dry by August. And yet they keep coming, because the road is a promise, and promises are hard to break. But the road itself is beginning to crack. The asphalt buckles in the heat. The infrastructure that supports the tourist economy, the motels, the gas stations, the restaurants, the national parks, is strained. The Navajo Nation, which relies on tourism for much of its income, is grappling with a lack of reliable electricity and running water in many of its communities. The town of Page, built around the Glen Canyon Dam, faces an uncertain future as Lake Powell drops to levels not seen since the dam was first filled. The houseboats that once floated on turquoise water now sit on mudflats. The marinas are moved year after year as the water recedes. The tourists still come to see the slot canyons and the Horseshoe Bend overlook, but they come with a new awareness. They are witnessing the end of something. And so the road, the great storyteller, has a new chapter to tell. It is a chapter about adaptation. In Flagstaff, the city has launched a plan to become carbon neutral by the year 2030. They are building bike lanes and solar arrays and electric vehicle charging stations. The local breweries are using reclaimed water. The hotels are eliminating single-use plastics. The Grand Canyon National Park is experimenting with hydrogen-powered shuttles and restricting the number of visitors during peak season. In Sedona, the city has implemented a system of timed entry permits for the most popular trailheads, a move that was once unthinkable in a town that prides itself on freedom and open space. But the crowds became too thick, the parking lots too full, the red rock trails too eroded. So the road, in its infinite wisdom, learned to say no. There is a story from the town of Jerome, the old copper mining camp that clings to the side of Cleopatra Hill like a barnacle on a shipwreck. In the 1980s, Jerome was nearly a ghost town, its population dwindling to less than 100. The road that passed through was barely paved, and the tourists who found it were mostly lost. But then the artists came. They bought the old buildings for pennies and turned them into galleries and studios. They painted murals on the crumbling walls. They opened a coffee shop and a bookstore and a bed and breakfast. And soon the road began to bring visitors in search of something off the beaten path, something authentic, something that felt like the Old West but with a touch of rebellion. Today, Jerome is a thriving community of about 500 people, and on any given weekend, the main street is packed with tourists from New York and Tokyo and Berlin. They come for the views, for the wine tasting rooms, for the ghost tour that tell the stories of the miners who died in the shafts. They come, in other words, for the road. But the people of Jerome, the artists and the old-timers and the newcomers, have had to learn how to manage the road. They have had to build new parking lots and designate shuttle stops and limit the size of tour buses. They have had to negotiate with the county for better infrastructure, for more water, for a fire station that can handle the increased risk. They have had to remember why they came in the first place, not for the money, not for the fame, but for the quiet, the light, the sense of being on the edge of something. And that is the paradox of the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state. It brings people to the edge, but the edge cannot hold them all. The very thing that makes Arizona beautiful, its vastness, its emptiness, its silence, is the thing that tourism threatens to destroy. The road is a double-edged sword. It opens up the desert to wonder, but it also opens it up to wear. The petroglyphs at the V-Bar V Ranch, the ancient rock art carved by the Sinagua people, are now protected by a fence and a locked gate. You can only see them on a guided tour, and you cannot touch them. The light pollution from the growing cities is washing out the stars over the International Dark Sky Park in Oracle. The sound of traffic is beginning to drown out the song of the cactus wren. The road is a wound in the landscape, a scar that keeps healing and reopening. But the road is also a connection. It connects the past to the present, the sacred to the profane, the tourist to the tour guide. It connects the woman in Tucson who grows heritage chilies in her backyard to the chef in Phoenix who turns them into a sauce that wins awards. It connects the Navajo weaver who still uses a spindle and a loom to the collector in Tokyo who pays $1,000 for a single rug. Connects the child who gasps at the sight of the Grand Canyon for the first time to the ranger who has stood at that same overlook for 30 years and still feels a shiver when the sun hits the limestone. The road is not just a strip of asphalt, it is a living network, a web of relationships. And as long as those relationships hold, the road will endure. So what comes next? In the year 2027, the state of Arizona will release a new tourism plan called Sustainable Horizons. It will call for a reduction in car traffic by promoting rail and bus connections, for a limit on the number of visitors to fragile sites, for a tax on overnight stays that will fund conservation projects. It will be controversial. The motel owners in Hallbrook will protest. The helicopter tour operators in the Grand Canyon will lobby against it. The politicians who depend on tourism dollars will try to water it down. But it will pass because the road has taught the people of Arizona one crucial lesson. You cannot take more than the desert can give. And so the road continues, but the travelers are different now. They are arriving in electric cars, recharging at stations that are powered by solar panels in the Mojave. They are staying at ecolodges that use graywater and compostable toilets. They are hiking with leave no trace principles, packing out everything they bring in, including their waste. They are learning to pronounce the names of the tribes correctly: Hopi, Tohono O Adjective Odhm, Navajo. They are buying souvenirs from native-owned businesses, not from the chain stores at the outlet malls. They are coming not just to see the sights, but to understand the stories. One of those stories is about a man named Stanley. He is a member of the White Mountain Apache tribe, and he leads tour through the Salt River Canyon. He is in his 50s, with a long gray braid and a face that looks like it was carved from the same stone as the cliffs. He takes his groups down to the river, where he points out the plants his ancestors used for medicine and food. He tells them about the great battle that was fought there in the 1870s and about the massacre that followed. He tells them about the boarding schools where his grandparents were sent and the loss of the language and the slow, painful process of reclaiming it. He tells them about the road that brought him back to this place, the road that allowed him to share his heritage with strangers. He does not charge much. He does not want to. He says the road is not about money. It is about connection. And as his group stands there, listening to the rush of the water and the call of the canyon wren, they understand. They understand that the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state is not just a destination. It is a responsibility, and so we come full circle. The road begins and ends in the same place, the longing inside us. The longing to see something bigger than ourselves, to stand on the edge of the known world, to feel the wind on our faces and the dust in our shoes. The road that turned Arizona into a tourist state is a testament to that longing. It is a monument to human curiosity and human greed, to our best intentions and our worst mistakes. It is a poem written in asphalt and neon, in petroglyphs and parking lots, in the voices of the people who call this desert home. And if you stand on that corner in Winslow, or at the south rim of the Grand Canyon, or on the red rocks of Sedona, you can feel it. You can feel the weight of all the journeys that came before you and the promise of all the ones yet to come. You can feel the road pulsing beneath your feet, ancient and new, waiting for the next traveler to come along. Tread lightly, take only pictures, leave only footprints, but more than that, take a story, take a new understanding, take a piece of the desert in your heart and carry it with you wherever you go. Because the road that turned Arizona into a tourist state is not just a road. It is a way of seeing the world, a way that asks us to look, to listen, to learn, and to love. And that, in the end, is the only reason any of us ever hit the road at all.